Welcome to the Build on Beauty podcast, where beauty is born skin deep. Now, here's your host, author, speaker, entrepreneur, Cornell Jermaine.
Thank you for joining me. I have a special guest with me. He is a dedicated father of four, a registered nurse, an entrepreneur, and the founder of the Build the Life You Want podcast, which discusses the best personal development books and ideas with the intent of helping people improve their health, leadership, finances, and relationships. Please help me welcome to the show, Mr. Bronson Wilks. Bronson, how you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad you're here with me. As stated, you are the host, a founder of the Build the Life You Want podcast, which discusses the best personal development books and ideas with the intent of helping people improve their leadership, finances, relationships, all the good things that we all need to always tweak and improve on. And just to note, it has been ranked the number 30 in the education category on Apple Podcasts. So congratulations to that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And speaking of podcasts, I also understand that you're a follower of the Haberman Lab podcast, which I'm also love. So we're going to have to talk about that at some given point.
Absolutely, man. I love Haberman.
Yes. So, but when we talk about the show, Build the Life You Want, tell us what inspired you to create a show around personal development books.
Well, it kind of started organically. Like I just, like every other average person, I was just out doing my job and felt like, maybe if I read some of these sales books or these leadership books, it would help me, advance my career. And it's kind of funny. I actually like talking about the philosophy of it all more than, getting out and doing some of the business strategy. So I started reading these books, to help myself, a form of education, basically. But I'm also interested in just learning all kinds of things, a lot of different areas and things. And so after I would read a book, I would write down sort of in a journal, like learnings I had. And I started putting goals around that. So I have these sheets of paper that every year I set my goals. At the bottom, I have books read. And at the end of the year, I write down things on the back that I achieved that year, and I would do the same thing with the books. What did I learn? And then over time, I just thought, you know what? One of the best ways to commit things to memory is to talk about it. And I like to talk everyone's ear off about these things anyway. So I'll just throw them on YouTube or what, and so it sort of turned into this kind of personal journal of mine where it's like, this is what I found interesting about this book, or here's some highlights that I want to remember forever. And if I ever want to get my own summary of that book, I can just jump on my, YouTube channel or podcast and review it. And then it started to grow, like people started getting interested. And so I started actually putting some energy behind it and putting it out there and getting active on social media and stuff. And it started turning into something, so that's where we are today. But it started just as my own kind of help myself out, keep my journal of what I've found and learned and discovered and what I want to share,
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, for people like me who also love personal development books, but tend to make them a part of the furniture or fixtures around the house, I don't always get to read them like I anticipate. Somebody say, hey, read this book, right? And you buy it and it sits in the Amazon box, then you take it out and it sits on the shelf. So for a person like me, I commend a person like you, because I would love to go and hear a little tidbit about it and then say, okay, maybe I should really be intentional with reading this book. So it helps people like me. But when did personal development become a thing for you? I noticed you said you always were into it and reading books, but when did it become a thing where you were like, this is something that I could probably improve my life with?
Well, there were different moments in life. I'll go back all the way to like junior high. So my grandpa put some money in an investment account for me, and that turned me on to the stock market. And so I was probably, I think he did that when I was like 8, 9 years old. So when I was like in junior high, I started going, wait a second, like he put $1,000 in there. It's turned into what, and so I got all very interested in the stock market, as did my parents at the same time. And we started sort of learning about it. So then I wanted to know, people make millions off of this. How do I do that? And so I started reading a lot of finance books. Started in the finance world for me, and I was obsessive about finance for several years, learning how to invest, and day traded for a while, and long-term investing, the Warren Buffett way, cash flow quadrant, like trying to figure out like how does money work, and was very entertained by that. So that I actually went to college for that. And then years later, I was married, had a kid, and my wife and I were kind of in a rut. And so we started going to like marriage counseling and stuff like that. And so that kind of put me on a different path. It was like, okay, how do I improve my relationships and be a good father and a good husband, and make things, really good again from where they are. And so started reading a lot of relationship books and personal development in the real sense of the self-help world or whatever, like reading a lot of books in that whole realm of how do I improve my personal character? How do I change my language? How do I communicate to my wife in a way that is meaningful to her, not necessarily what I'm trying to feel, So that opened a whole new can of worms, and then the progression of my career. I started being in leadership positions and became a consultant and things like that. And so suddenly I'm going like, okay, this is a little bit of pressure in the whole, how do I move an army, And so I start reading books about leadership, personality traits, how to identify and work with various kinds of people, because people come from all types of backgrounds and sort of genetic personalities. They've learned traits, and it's like, how do you really get the best out of a variety of people and use that in a team? And so start reading those kind of books. So it's like, there's just been moments along my path that have sort of kept me going in some form of this world, which has made it hard to narrow it down to like, I do this thing, and it just turned into, I just read a lot of great books that you could learn from, and I'll share them with you.
Yeah. So to me, it just sounds like you made learning with reading essentially a life strategy, when it comes to, you get into a rut or a roadblock or in between a rock and a hard place. Let me hear what the wisdom of others how they can lead or help me out of this situation. So that's exactly. A great point. That's a great point. I'm curious, as it pertains to books, being first a personal development reader and now a host of a show, how do you measure? Because you say you present the best personal books. So how do you measure whether a book is the best, or if it's good or just okay, or, oh, don't never read that? How do you measure that? Do you have a certain way of measuring, or is it just how it speaks to you, how it resonates?
It's mostly just how it resonates with me. And so when I say that, I guess it's a very subjective thing, right? Saying like, I'm trying to find the best ones that I can find. And probably the more similar you are to me, the more you're going to agree. But for example, there's one I can't seem to get rid of. It's laying on my floor here, called, what is it? The Wild at Heart. It's called Wild at Heart.
Okay.
I couldn't even get through it. I was like, this is like a romance novel. And then just a week ago, I heard a UFC fighter say that that's like his favorite book, I'm going like, okay, well, clearly he and I are not on the same page. Like I got halfway through and said, what, I give up, guys. I did give my spiel on the podcast, said, hey, it's got these themes in it. It's trying to do this. If you kind of, maybe if you're more into novels, but you want to read a self-help book, this might be for you. But I couldn't do it, and so I gave my honest feedback about what the book is and said, on to the next one. So, I am trying to find the best ones, but sometimes you don't know how good they are until you're, midway through. And, now that I have a show to do, there's a bit more pressure to actually like get through a book and give some sort of content and feedback and opinion on the book. So finding the best books, I would say I read a lot of books, and then I try to portray which ones I really resonate with on my website, on social media, through the podcast, things like that. I have a list on my website. It's like, these are my best books. I have an ebook that I wrote that's called The 7 Books That Changed My Life. Right. So things like that. I try to categorize them up and say, here are the ones that changed me.
Yeah. When you say best books, and I've noticed in the years of, and you've been in this space, personal development, so I'm sure you've been to events and all that, and you've heard speakers, and many of the people always refer some of the classics. I'm just curious of your thoughts of those. Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, and then you have a couple of them by Dale Carnegie, and there's some others, Jim Rohn's. Some of those typical classic books when it comes to personal development. Do you feel they are the best or present the best information when it comes to developing?
So I've listened to Jim Rohn a ton, and I love his YouTube and stuff like that. I've never read his book or books. I guess he's written a couple. I did read Think and Grow Rich. I think they're helpful. Here's what I've found with most books is they have like one or two good ideas that are something you should hang on to, right? And then a lot of the rest of the book is sort of like proving that right, or personal experience, or even trying to lengthen a book. Sometimes books it's like they should have been 3 chapters and they're like 10, So some of those old classics, they've got something in them that you should grab onto. And obviously they wouldn't be those classics if the masses didn't find that, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I like Think and Grow Rich is not one that I go to that I'm like, yeah, you got to have this book. But I think I'm in the minority on that one. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of that also comes from like, what's your background? Right. I already said, like in junior high, I was obsessed with finance.
Yeah.
So when I got to college, sitting in accounting classes, I was just going like, oh my gosh, what are we doing? Like, this is painful and not helpful. Right.
Yeah.
But to the person that didn't know a dang thing about finance, they're going like, okay, like let's write all this down and let's take this home. Right. So I guess every book appeals to you based on your experience, your state in life, like what are the struggles you're fighting right now, and are you building a business, are you struggling in your marriage, are you trying to get healthy physically, like, so I think a lot of that depends on where'd you come from, what do you know, what are your life experiences, and what are you trying to do right now.
Yeah, so true. And you mentioned that books tend to have one or two thoughts that they're trying to, I guess, get the reader to understand. That's why I used to love it. I don't know if they have those anymore, but do you remember a time when we used to go to like a Barnes and Nobles and they used to have a little section called Cliff Notes? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Well, obviously they probably don't have it because we're in this digital age, but that was like the Reader's Digest of getting the quickest thought that this book is going to portray without having to read the whole thing. So I remember that.
It was the cheat code for college. Right?
I know, right? I know. But you mentioned being interested in finances early in life, and then you mentioned your granddad putting that $1,000 up. I'm curious, out of the finance books, you mentioned classics like Robert Kiyosaki's Quadrant. I forget the full title, but it's something about the
cash flow quadrant.
Yes, cash flow quadrant, and he had Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and you mentioned also Warren Buffett's process. What have you learned about finance looking back at that time? What did that teach you about money and finances?
Well, money, it's kind of funny. It shouldn't be so complicated, but there really are so many ways you can go about money because of the way banks work, the way the stock market works, the way the government's inflating cash, right? So like there's just so many aspects of like, you can't just earn money, put it on your mattress and become really wealthy, because the government's always got inflation at play. So that money on your mattress is actually becoming worth less, right? Yeah. So then like cash flow quadrant, I mean, he talks about the 4 arenas of money. Like I might not have them perfect, but like an employee is sort of number 1. If you just become an employee, you're trading your hourly rate, your hours of your life for a certain amount of money. And when you clock out, you're done earning money.
Yeah.
And you have to do it again the next day, right? You could become like a small business owner where now you could hire an employee or two and sort of grow the amount of money that you have the capability of earning. You're also developing an asset that one day you could sell. Mm-hmm. But it's a small business, so you're not likely becoming extremely wealthy, and you'll also probably be all like directly involved all the time. So it might crowd into the rest of your life because you can't really clock out. Then there's like, I think it's the large business owner or investor.
Yeah.
Where essentially it's a 24-hour gig. You've got tons of employees. There's, you're a part owner in that asset that's growing, and it's a big monster that's now working for you. And whether you show up or don't show up, it's going to keep moving because there's so many people dependent on it. Right. And then there's that person, I forget his last quadrant. Basically, it's another form of investing, having a bunch of assets that sort of work. So whether that's real estate, treasuries, stocks, it could be a variety of different things. And you're not hired by that. You're not attached to that. You just are a part owner of these assets that bring in cash. You control a certain amount of revenue, and then you have like the ability to, in all the business ones, you have the ability to manipulate your taxes. Yeah. Right. So like earn money, don't pay tax, versus the employee, you're just getting taxed at a certain rate and there's nothing you can do about it. Right. So part of earning money is earning it. Part of it is not paying more than you have to. Part of it is trying to figure out how to get to that side where you can just put your money into assets that will grow and continue to just make more and more money over time. And so, those types of things, the Warren Buffett way really talks about long-term investing. I mentioned I day traded for like 1 year in college. I didn't get a job. I just day traded money. Mm-hmm. And in the end, I made a little bit, but it was chaos. I had no real advantage over people in New York that are, in this, that have some sort of insider information and stuff. And so it's like, well, who am I to beat the pros? I'm basically gambling with pros and have no advantage. And so, it was a learning lesson, and that's the opposite of the Warren Buffett way. He's like, find a company that you can see has a clear history. It's got a moat around its market. There's no, they're not going to be easily penetrated, and it's going to do well forever, and just buy that and hold on to it, and really that's sort of worked out better for me in the long run as well. And so I learned all these things from just reading these books. Like these people have got all the experience. I don't have to try doing it all over again.
Right. I know. Now that you're I guess putting out there that you're reading these books and acquiring all this knowledge, have you become like the go-to person in your family and circle of friends where, well, let's run it by Bronson first, or what do you think? Have you become that individual now?
On a few things, yeah, like especially the finance world. But I love talking about economics with people, because it's a complex beast and everybody hears their bit from the news or whatever. But I guess because I stay so tuned into some of the monsters like Ray Dalio and Warren Buffett and Kathy Newman and all these various personalities / business gurus, I get a lot of sort of up-to-date information from them, and that has turned into a pretty successful investing life for myself personally. So a lot of people around me go like, well, what's the next thing, And,
right.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not a prophet, but it's it's helpful.
Yes, sir. Well, speaking of not just being a podcaster, entrepreneur, but you're also a registered nurse. Talk to us about your journey as a registered nurse.
Well, it's a little bit short-lived. So I was almost to graduate in finance in like 2008. Mm-hmm. I had like a few classes to take to get a finance degree, and the 2008 crash, melted a lot of that. And I was like going, this is a bleak outlook here. Hindsight, I probably should have just done it. I would have made a killing, but I had actually bounced between pre-med and finance a couple times. So when that all went down, I sort of went, maybe I'll go to nursing. And I went through an accelerated nursing program. I love science. Like the human body is so fascinating to me. So nursing school was a blast, actually. I know a lot of people feel the opposite, and they're like one of the most painful times of their life. I loved it. Nursing school was awesome. And then getting into nursing, the upside was directly helping people that need help, right? I mean, these are people that are in hospitals or other conditions that it's like they need help from an expert. And so that was enjoyable, but I'm kind of a wimp, man. I'm not into changing a nasty wound or like smells and stuff. I couldn't do it. So I wasn't actually meant to be a good nurse, but I only spent about 2 years doing actual nursing care. And after that, I've had a pretty long career in other aspects of healthcare. Mm-hmm. So for the last 4 years, I was working with hospitals to reduce cost and improve outcomes for patients. So somewhat of a consultant type role, trying to figure out, like, can we improve the collaboration between hospital, skilled nursing facility, home health, family engagement, trying to track these patients longer. We're trying to reach upstream and prevent hospitalizations. And then if a patient comes to the hospital and goes home, how can we keep them home healthy, And so that's kind of where healthcare is today. So that's where the nursing has taken me.
That's a necessary work because I've dealt with that with my dad firsthand. So I understand all aspects of it. And you mentioned making things cost effective. I'm curious, is that for both the hospital and the patient when you're talking about a strategy to do that?
Oh boy. So it's a hairy beast.
I can imagine.
So many different payers and everything. So if we just said like Medicare, government payer, that's primarily what we did. We're looking at like historical averages. And so the hospital gets paid for Medicare. And in the past, there's like hospital gets paid for what they do. Doctor might bill something else. Skilled nursing facility might bill for this, home health for this. And it just, everyone's very separated, like a segregated healthcare system. Mm-hmm. And so some of these programs they've tried to develop that I worked on was like, okay, let's pay the hospital only. And now the hospital pays all those other people. And so it creates some accountability. Like not everyone just doing everything they can do to make money, but how can we get good care for this patient, appropriate care, and we're actually accountable to what we're billing for and all that stuff, right? So, so I think the accountability piece is probably the part that's driving savings more than anything, but also some of this movement in how can we help a patient be healthy at home. So a lot of remote patient monitoring is really becoming popular, and how can we sort of say, okay, go home where you actually do better. Like people don't get well in hospitals, right? So go home, get well there. You can sleep right. You can see your people. You can eat your normal food, whatever. And then what can we do in addition to say, okay, we see change of, condition. So how can we take action before you come to the hospital? So, So the savings has sort of been more for Medicare. And we did save billions of dollars over the last few years in these programs, but at the same time, there's all kinds of new things to bill for. So it's a
hairy beast.
It's an uphill battle, man. It's crazy.
Yeah. I have to ask, and I'm asking only because this is the first time I've talked to someone who's dealt in that space when talking about the finance of medicine. Mm-hmm. And dealing with my dad, he had to be in a facility for some time. And when I found out, and the reason I found out because we found out Medicare was going to run out, and how fast it was going to run out compared to how many days he needed to stay. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So I have to ask this, and is there I guess I have to just ask it the way it's coming up. Would you say that there is some level of price gouging when it comes to medicine and our care in the medical industry?
I mean, there's some stuff that's very clear and obvious. As far as like your father's situation in a nursing home, I'm assuming, or a rehab.
Yes, rehab. Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty standard practice, and essentially, so the billing is kind of backwards actually. So like the facility gets paid for a daily rate. So there's certain codes they could bill for. So you take a patient, you go, they've got, these 4 things or whatever that we're billing for. One is the priority. So that's like level 1, and then everything else might add to that bill rate. So they bill on a daily rate. So they're actually incentivized to keep somebody as long as they can sort of justify it. And then Medicare is just going to fit the bill. So that might not be the most healthy thing for a patient. So there's some battle there, right? It's like, okay, I mean, glad that they get they can go to this facility and get billed, but there's also some negatives to that. Like if a patient needs a specialist, but that's not covered under that daily rate, or it might go over their daily rate. So they'll actually lose money by sending a patient to that specialist. They'll go, you know what? You'll only be here for 2 weeks. After that, you can go see your specialist on your own time and on your own dime. And it's like, that's not so great, right? So that whole world, it could use some work. I know a guy that wrote a book called The Incentive Cure. I've never even read it, but I worked with him. So he kind of was trying to solve this problem, right? We have the incentive in the wrong place for healthcare people, whether that's a practitioner or a business owner or whatever. If that incentive was changed, the care might change, right? As far as price gouging, like, I mean, if you've ever looked at a hospital bill, it's pretty clear you get charged an outrageous amount for like an ibuprofen. When I was in the ER as a nurse, every patient that came in, it's basically standard to just like, based on what I figured the doctor might say, I go, okay, let's get them in. We'll take their vitals. We'll start an IV. We'll hang a bag of like NS solution, get it going. And then we'll go check the orders. I'll go check the orders, and doctor, yep, sure enough, it's on there. Well, that bag of essentially salt water is an outrageous amount of money. And it's like, I'm pretty sure it didn't cost, $50 or $80 to make a bag of water. So there's some really disturbing things in healthcare. Pharmaceuticals, it's hard to gauge like what's real and not real, because clearly these massive companies have fought wild illnesses. Like, we've eradicated some things that people used to die from on the regular.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we're all feeling kind of manipulated by them to do more, take more, advertisements on TV to get it all. So it's a difficult like road to navigate, you're like,
for sure.
I'm not sure where I stand.
On both ends, because if when and I'm saying this because I had this experience with a friend. When you're in a situation and you need that emergency medical attention, and someone says, "Well, I'm gonna call the ER," I mean not ER, but the ambulance, and the person says, "No, that's okay. I'll just drive," because they don't want the ambulance bill that's attached. Yeah. I said, we need an intervention when it comes to how we do healthcare in America, because anytime a person is in that state, not obviously it wasn't something that, but we felt like you never know. So it's always better to reach out to the people who are experts, bring them immediately versus trying to drive and you know what I mean? But they said, no, that's okay, because I don't want that $1,000 bill that comes with it. You know what I mean?
You know what I've wondered frequently, and I don't have an answer on this, but there's this debate, socialized medicine or free market, or which one's better. And honestly, I don't know. I think there's advantages for both, but where we stand right now is a mix between the two, and they both kind of cause weird issues. So there might be a patient that has both, like a Medicare plus a supplemental. So you've got essentially socialized medical, like Medicaid, Medicare, that's socialized medicine, right? Plus, when people come into the hospital without insurance, the hospital just eats it.
Yeah.
And that's socialized medicine. You know what I mean? So there's like all this form of socialized medicine. And then at the same time, we've got like these rules set by the free market that's kind of free. And it's, they have deals with pharmaceutical companies and with hospitals. And it's like, I can't be sure, but it seems like there's a lot of manipulation of pricing and stuff like that. And then we're like obligated to have insurance, which sort of is good for them, right? And it's like, man, like I said, a hairy beast. It's just like we got both going on, and American healthcare costs far more than any other country. and we are the best at like emergency care, but we're not even close to the best at long-term care and end-of-life care and all kinds of other situations. So it's wild. It's a wild world.
I'm curious. Have you seen that? It's a documentary that his first name is Michael, and he talked about. He talked about healthcare in different countries, but he covered, of course, U.S. But then he ended with, I think it was France. And when the time this documentary came out, everybody wanted to move to France because France had, and they were just talking about the difference. I don't know what the name. I wish I could think of the name of this documentary.
I know what you're talking about.
Michael, what is his name? Michael Moore. Michael Moore.
That's right.
But I'm curious, when it comes to that socialized medicine, where does the money come from? Because it appears that the countries that have that, I mean, it appears to us, obviously we're on the outside looking in, that they have pretty decent care. Would you say?
Well, I mean, I've only had one firsthand experience. I lived in Argentina for a couple of years, and they have a horrible socialized medical program. Okay. So it was just terrible. But maybe Argentina is too far behind. Canada and France might be a different scenario, right? It's really hard to judge because you know how easily people can manipulate statistics to say the message they want you to know. And healthcare is made up of so many illnesses, so many interventions, so many demographics. Like, how do you narrow it down to like, well, France does it, it's really hard. Like I said, like America is by far the best at like emergency medicine. We could basically keep a dead person alive like anytime. Like we have just amazing technology and physicians and education and resources, and it's just phenomenal. But that ambulance bill you mentioned is not cheap, right? So it's really difficult. But those end of life services, America tends to treat for cure instead of saying, look, like this is where you are on your path and your future looks, based on statistics and analysis, you look like this. I mean, this is kind of how your life is. You might want to come to terms with what's going to be in your will and what do you want to say and where do you want to live for the next 60, 90 days of your life. And, what does that look like for you? And instead we're going hospital, ER, medicine, antibiotics, intervention, trach and vent, and like just all this crazy, expensive, awful, unenjoyable stuff happening in the last 30 days of a person's life. You know what I mean? So I think other countries, whether it's because of their culture or their socialized programs or whatever it is, they do better with that. And I don't know the answer of why, but they're better at those things, and we're better at keeping people, bringing them back from the dead, essentially. I mean, we do a really good job of intense emergency medicine.
Yeah, so true, so true. And just the thought, I want to commend people like you who are registered nurses, because I've been in those situations. Obviously, I told you about my dad, but so I've seen firsthand. Most people give credit to the doctors who do a great job, but those RNs, if it wasn't for the RNs, I'm telling you, many people would be in a deficit. I'll just say it like that. But in a recent episode, speaking of socialization, you covered a book called The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter, and you discussed why people who are lower on the totem pole when it comes to socioeconomics might be at more at risk for developing certain diseases. Share with us more about this concept and the science behind it.
Pretty wild. I actually learned about this in nursing school, and that has turned into a couple of episodes on my podcast. But essentially, there is some clear lines to be drawn between your socioeconomic status and sort of numbers or types of illnesses that you're likely to get statistically. Right. So at least part of that is probably associated with increased levels of cortisol over a long time period. So the short version of that is when you come across an emergency situation, a scary time, a stressful time, whatever it is, you'll have a cortisol spike that is intended to help your body sort of address the issue, right? That's where your flight or fight, I can't spit it out, but your fight or flight response comes from. And I think in the book Blinky describes it pretty well, but like a police officer in a chase or something, it's like their vision becomes super narrow. They can see, people will describe it as like slow motion, right? So this is all as a result of that cortisol spike and your nervous system responding. And so once that incident subsides, your cortisol should go back to a normal level and you should carry on. So the cortisol is not necessarily all that damaging to your body. It's sort of just a natural hormone that we use for an intense moment. Get focused, right? You might have to fight, you might have to whatever. But when people live in poorer socioeconomic classes, they tend to live in worse neighborhoods too. So there might be constant threat of violence. There might be, the car doesn't work, or you don't even have one, or it's constantly on the verge of breaking down. Single parent homes could be a factor. There could be, just anything you can think of that essentially causes more stress, right? And if you live in a stressful state of mind all the time, your cortisol stays high and it starts to have the opposite effect of what it's supposed to do. So it starts to actually contribute to a clouded mind, poor decision-making, worse response times, right? In that moment where you have a cortisol spike, you have better response times, but someone that's had sustained high levels of cortisol, they have worse response times. So you're more likely to get in a car accident. You're more likely to develop a variety of like chronic illnesses or what we would call autoimmune conditions or cancers, like all kinds of problems come up. And then that doesn't help the cycle. You know what I mean? You just sort of, now you got to make a trip to the doctor when you already didn't have time or money. And you might be working 2 jobs. It's so it's this like cycle that people get caught in. So the higher up the socioeconomic ladder you go, the more likely you are to buy good food, maybe even have someone cook it for you, have a nice car that gets you from point A to point B, more time to enjoy a vacation or a time with friends, or your Super Bowl party might be a little bit more entertaining or fun versus someone who's like, oh, I got to run from this job to that job and hopefully my kids are okay. It's just the change of lifestyle allows for those moments of relaxation, kind of centered, maybe better, more quality time with people you love, eating good food, getting the care you need, getting from point A to point B stress-free. So all that stuff sort of contributes to a healthier balance of hormones and stress. And the cycle just gets in there and it continues. And so then you get trapped.
Yeah. When it comes to that, I guess, sustained spiked cortisol level, can it ultimately lead to mental illness or altering your personality in a way?
I'm not the doctor, but yeah, like hormones control everything in our body, right? So hormones are the communicators, one of the communicators in our body that basically tell the brain, like, we need resources here or there. And when you get an imbalance of hormones or other communicators in your body, it has an effect. And like I said, that sustained cortisol, creates poor response times, actually a lower intelligence level for you, not, compared to the general population. So you can imagine that creates all kinds of mental struggles for people. And then if you're in that state because of your community or whatever, it's just compounded, so depression probably is much higher, likelihood of divorces and suicides and all kinds of stuff. It's just, any negative thing that's associated with your stress and mental health has probably contributed to, you know.
What would you recommend for someone to adjust or bring down? Are there, obviously you hear people talking about meditation a lot these days. What things can an individual do regardless of resources, whether they have money or not? What can they do to ultimately kind of bring those hormone levels back into a safe place?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think there's probably a lot of things. I mean, I just did an episode on the book called Breath. And while I wasn't totally convinced of some of the scientific stuff they brought into it, I think other aspects of it were very scientifically accurate. And being able to do some breathing work, you know, that's free and easy. You could do it while you're in the car or whatever, right? So being able to do breath work and meditation, a lot of evidence around meditation or prayer, what, you know, some moment where actually, I'm reminded actually of an episode I did on blue zones, you know, where people live to be like 100 years old. So these centenarians, almost all of them, they live in some sort of religious community where prayer is a part of their life. So on Sunday, no matter how busy they are, they're going to take a few hours to go to church. It's common to, before dinner or before bed or whatever, you know, certain moments in the day to stop and pray. And, you know, whether you're religious or you want to go the form of meditation, I think the thing is that you sort of get out of that hectic world that you're living in. You take a moment to be grateful for what you have, calm down, relax, breathe, take a moment, you know, and sort of reduce your heart rate, take some deep breaths, calm your mind, and then get back after it, right? So that's a free and easy one. Exercise is an amazing thing. The two things that I preach constantly on my podcast are like sleep and exercise. This book right here, Why We Sleep, is, can you even see it? It's just out of the frame. Maybe.
I can see it.
That's one of my favorite books ever. Like, I knew sleep was important, but after reading that book, he just details the various things that sleep does to your body. And the lack of sleep sounds almost exactly like I described with high levels of cortisol. It's like your memory retention is down, your functionality is down, your athleticism is down, your mental health is worse. You're like, everything you can think of is worse if you get poor sleep. And if you miss, if you get poor sleep one night, there's no catch up. Like, you don't just get that back. All you can do is improve make sure from now forward you get good sleep. So get 8 hours of sleep, try and get good quality of sleep. So that's another thing in the socioeconomic class. You might live by a train or something, you know, an airport, like a loud area. So there's studies. I don't know if it's in that book or not. I think it is. People who lived closer to a loud thing, got poor quality of sleep, had all kinds of worse outcomes in life.
Wow.
So getting sleep regulates your hormones. It does all the repairs. One of the most fascinating things from that book, when you go to sleep, the ganglia in your brain shrink and the cleaners come in and clean the city. So he said it's akin to New York City shrinking down many times its size so that the sanitation workers could come in and clean it up real quick.
Wow.
And so then the morning comes and they sort of bloom back up and go to work. But if you don't clean your brain out on a regular basis, you get an accumulation of these little proteins that are actually associated with Alzheimer's and memory loss. And so the miraculous things that happen during sleep are just, it's everything in your health. And so that's one. And then the other thing is exercise. I mean, it regulates hormones. I heard somebody on a TED Talk talking about flexing your muscles releases proteins into your blood that basically cause happiness.
Wow.
Right. So there's all these things that come from sleep and exercise that change your mental health and your entire life, really.
You mentioned sleep and it was, you just kind of gave me a eye-opening moment, because you said you can't catch up on it. And I'm that person that I might have 4 or 5 hours of sleep for 6 days in a row. And I'm like, okay, I'm good. I'll just keep going because I'll catch up on Sunday, or I'll catch up on Tuesday, or whatever. If it's a day I know I got a little lighter load of. Yeah. And you just told me, no, you just lost all those 5 or 6 days. So if you sleep 12 hours one day, it does not make up. Wow. I'm glad. So now I have to prioritize sleep a little more. Thank you for that information. Wow.
Right. And I used to live by that philosophy of like, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Well,
I know a lot of people that do that.
If you don't sleep, you're going to be dead a lot earlier. Like that's the reality.
Wow.
I'll give you a couple other, like, I don't know the exact numbers, but you may have heard this one because it's kind of popular on social media, but on daylight savings, the day that we lose an hour of sleep, heart incidences like hospitalizations from heart attacks and things like that go up like 27% or something close to 30%.
I did not know that.
And on the day that we gain an hour of sleep, it goes down nearly the same percentage.
Wow.
So people losing 1 more hour of sleep contributes to that kind of visible change in their healthcare outcomes. I mean, pretty wild, right? There's another one in Greece where, you know how some of these European countries had like a siesta in the middle of the day, they would sort of go sleep. Well, in Greece, the pressure from tourism and stuff sort of caused these people to give it up, their siesta, and stay open during the day. And they actually got on top of that. A university started tracking these people, and the ones that gave up their siesta had all kinds of increased problems, heart attacks and things like that. And so decreased testosterone, like it's everything, man. Your whole body is jacked up by not getting sleep. Wow. It's crazy.
Wow. I'm gonna do better. I promise I'm gonna do better. But I have to ask, and I know you don't profess to be the guru in this, but based on your learning, is there a proper way to sleep? Because I know I like black, no noise. I don't want to hear anything, but I know people that have to have the TV on and all kind of foolishness. And I'm like, is there a proper way that we should be sleeping, or is it just as long as you sleep?
Somewhat. No, there's proper ways. So you should go to bed within about a half hour the same time every day. So, you know, there are certain releases of hormones, and we won't go into detail, but yeah, like hormones release at specific times in your sleep cycle. And if you miss that, you don't get it back. So going to sleep at the same time every day, or approximately the same time, is important. Dark, a little bit cool and quiet is, ideal. So people that sleep with an earbud in their in their ear, listen to a podcast or a TV on, or things that wake you up, whether that's kids or trains or planes or whatever, those are all bad. So you have these sleep cycles where you essentially go from, to deep sleep to nearly awake, or even sometimes wake up and then down, and it's like, they call them sleep cycles or spindles, actually. And the number of sleep spindles is directly correlated to all kinds of health outcomes and memory, right? So when you are asleep, your brain is rerunning information throughout the day, transferring things from short-term memory to long-term memory, kicking out things that you've signaled as unimportant, and cleaning your brain and all kinds of stuff, and regenerating resources your body needed in a variety of things. If you exercise and you need muscle, all that stuff happens in your sleep. And so, getting to bed at the right time, a good cool temperature, quiet, dark, and 8 hours.
Wow. So good. Wow. Well, you have given me a couple of aha moments here today, and I think they were needed, because now I can't catch up, but at least I can now do better moving forward when it comes to my sleep pattern. But you mentioned it earlier in the show, and you said you have a book on the website, and you guys be sure to go check it out. But it talks about 7 books that changed your life. And I don't want to cover all 7, but I want you to give me maybe one of those that changed your life, and why.
Well, I already talked about Why We Sleep. That's on there. I'll go with The True Believer. It's an interesting one. It's actually quite old, and essentially talks about how mass movements start why people join them, and he maps out the same patterns across things like Jesus and Hitler and presidents and all kinds of things, right? And so all these are mass movements, and what characteristics did the leader have? What was sort of the political environment that people felt the need to jump on board? Oftentimes they're jumping off of one train onto another. People who are on opposite ends of the spectrum politically are more likely to be converts. So if the left and right political spectrum is a line, someone in the middle is less likely to become left or right than someone on the extremes is to switch completely. So he says those extremists are actually more closely related or similar to each other than someone in the middle. So a lot of really interesting concepts in there, and in a world that seems like there's a new movement every day, it just made me sit back and go, like, why am I attracted or unattracted to this thing? You know what I mean? Like, whether it's a religious or a political or the, Black Lives Matter or the women power or fighting the patriarchy or, and I'm obviously a straight white man. So, who's fighting what battle, and why am I attracted or unattracted to one or the other? It's really thought provoking. It's really interesting. Like I said, Hitler and Jesus both are portrayed in that book, and you would never make that connection on your own, or at least I wouldn't go like, yeah, these guys have similar traits. But like, people, one thing I'll just say about it that I really think about a lot is people don't often truly want the burden of decision making. And when you join a mass movement, whether that's a religion or a political thing or jumping on a presidential candidate's bandwagon, it could be because the decisions are made for you, and you could just go, yeah, that's, those are the problems, these are the solutions. All I got to do is stay in line and donate my money and cheer them on, right? And it's like the cure will come because I'm on the bandwagon, and the personal responsibility of decision making and thought, truly thinking these problems out has been removed from me. The leader's taking us there. Yeah. Let's just go. So, if you think of it in that way, it's a conscious decision to say, okay, well, what do I and don't I know? How do I know that what I think is right is right? What other opinions can I find that might give me some new information, someone else's perspective, and then I have to make that decision. And so, the temptation is like, well, I'll just throw my hands up and follow somebody or something. But it's a big responsibility to try and live your life individually and go, what is for me and what is not, what is accurate and inaccurate, and so it's, I don't know. I often wrestle with it. I don't know if I'm, qualified to be making some of these decisions. And so then it's tempting to say, well, who seems qualified? I'll just follow them. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah. Give us the name of that book, True Believer.
The True Believer.
The True Believer. I want to, by Eric
Hoffer.
Eric Hoffer. Wow. Sounds like a good read. I'll definitely be checking that one out. Well, it's been a great time here today. And I want to, before we go, I want to ask you about your show, Build the Life You Want. Obviously, your show talks about books that have resonated with you. Why did you name it Build the Life You Want, though?
You'll have support, you'll have friends, you'll have opportunities. But if you're not focused on a vision, trying to achieve certain goals, it's not going to happen. This is just kind of how that goes. And so, I just try to encourage people, like, create your goals list. Like, what is that? What's your vision of the person you want to be? And I actually have a second book on the website that's called Ingrained: 3 Steps to Achieve Any Goal. And so essentially what that is like set your goals, get clear about it. Not just what other people have achieved, but what you want to look like on your daily lifestyle. So what's the version of you next year as far as what you do on a daily basis? Because I do believe that a certain percentage or portion of who you are, or your character or your identity, is what you do. Mm-hmm. And so you can change that. You could change that, right? So if I'm this guy, I want to be this guy. Like, I want to be someone that exercises regularly so that I can play with my kids and serve people and work really hard and have a good attitude doing it. Well, then I'm going to have to be fit. So I want to be someone who exercises every day. So that's one of my goals on my list. Is I literally changed my goal for 2023 to, I want to exercise a minimum of 10 minutes, 365 days, which is not a normal goal, right? A lot of people would say like 3 days a week or whatever. So most days, like for today, I ran just under 6 miles with some big hills and whatever in an hour.
Wow.
So clearly far over my 10 minutes, but there's never a day that I don't do 10 minutes. Some days I just run up and down my stairs in my house for 10 minutes because I'm like, I'm busy. I got to do stuff. I'm not in the mood, but I want to be a person that's fit. So that is who I am. You know what I mean? So you create this vision of who you are and your goals, and then you create daily rituals. It's not so much focused on the end outcome, though that is important, but what's the daily ritual you're going to do? So the exercise, right? So you got to start at the right place, the right pace, and the right duration. That's what I always say. And then consistency is like the step 3. So anyway, that the long answer to your question is like, to build a life you want, you've got to get very intentional about it. You need to figure out what you don't know. You need to implement daily rituals that are going to take you there, and you need to continue to work that way forever, basically. And so define who you want to be, and then get after it. Get up and start moving.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So good. So good. Well, before we jump off the line, I want to get you to play this game with me. It's called My 5 Favorites. So what it is I'll give you 2 options and you tell me your favorite. Are you ready?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
All righty. Music or movies?
Music.
Sweatsuits or scrubs?
Sweatsuits.
I know now, right? You say throw those scrubs away, right?
Yeah.
Old school. This is going to be old school. I'm sure you remember it. Barnes and Nobles or Borders?
I don't know Borders.
No, you don't know Borders? Borders
no,
bookstore?
I'll go Barnes and Noble. Yeah.
Well, maybe Borders was more of a Midwest book chain. Maybe. Okay, Barnes and Nobles. One more, Napoleon Hill or Dale Carnegie?
Toss up. I'll say Dale Carnegie.
Okay, that's what I was thinking too. That would have been my choice as well. And the last one, I know this is going to be tough because you just talked about running that hill. Eat or exercise?
Oh, that's impossible.
I know, right?
Literally on my book, I said, when I introduced myself, I said I exercise a lot to compensate for the overconsumption of delicious calories. So, I might be eating while I run.
Right. I love it. I love it. Well, Bronson, I appreciate you joining me. Please tell our listeners how they could connect with you, listen to the podcast, and learn about all that you have going on.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, by the way. It's been fun talking with you. But they can find me at on Instagram. It's Build the Life You Want, BW for Bronson Wilks. My website is bronsonwilks.com. And really, those are the places I'm most active. So my website, go to the podcast, go to Instagram. So
awesome. Well, guys, you have it. Mr. Bronson Wilson with Build the Life You Want. Well, this has been the Build on Beauty podcast, where beauty is born skin deep. I'm your host, Cornell Jermaine. Until next time, let your soul be made whole. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Build on Beauty podcast. For more information about our host, please visit cornelljermaine.com.